So, you're the new UK Prime Minister and you lose your very first big vote. Boris Johnson's inauspicious start included 21 MPs from his own Conservative Party shrugging off the threat of banishment and crossing the aisle. Has Boris lost control, as some of the tabloids said? Control of Parliament? Well, definitely for the time being. But what about the Conservative Party? Too early to say. Having lost his majority, Johnson's clear aim is to sharpen his knives for a UK general election where you might want to forget the old school centre-left versus centre-right vision of political blocs in the UK. Those blocs, by the way, have already been blown away in countries like France and Italy. We've seen those big formations splintering badly in Spain and Germany. In Britain, there's still a fog surrounding the new political fault lines. And for the time being, it's clear that Johnson prefers to rally a small but energized core of Brexiters and to try and preserve a big tent Tory party. Will that strategy work? What's next for the world's longest-running parliamentary democracy? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking the question of whether or not Boris Johnson has lost control already. And joining us shortly from London, former Conservative Party advisor Stephen Canning. We welcome from Manchester, former Conservative member of the European Parliament, Sajjad Karim. Welcome back to the show.
Good evening.
Here in the studio, Catherine Coron, Associate Professor of British Civilization, you at the University of Paris at Panthéon-Assas. You have the unenviable task of explaining all of this to your students.
Exactly.
All right, welcome to the show. I want to welcome as well France 24's Philip Turrell. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yeah, as we've seen this week, no observation round with Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. He wants a general election right away. First, though, he's got to endure a second defeat over the opposition's Brexit delay bill. Only when he's addressing opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn during Prime Minister's question time, he doesn't call it the Brexit delay bill.
And what his surrender bill would do, it would wreck any chance of the talks, and we don't know what his strategy is at all were he to take over. He's asking for mobs of momentum activists to paralyse the traffic in the name of his. What are they supposed to chant, Mr. Speaker? What is the slogan? What do we want? What do we want? Dither and delay. When do we want it? We don't know. That's his policy. That's his policy. And can he confirm again, can he confirm now, that he will allow the people of this country to decide on what he is giving up in their name with a general election on October the 15th? Or is he frit?
Frit? First of all, what does frit mean, Philip?
I have been trying to work out what he means by frits. He was calling him chlorinated chicken, saying there was only one chicken in the only one chlorinated
I'm told it means spineless or fearful in
spineless,
Scotland.
Fearful. There were some sexist remarks also uttered by Boris Johnson in the House of Commons, which I won't repeat here, but have caused a lot of the buzz on the internet this afternoon. Something to do with the blouse. You can check that out yourselves if you like. But no love lost between Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn.
We hear that
even more vociferous and aggressive today than we've seen before.
But we see, you can look at it two ways, because we played a long clip there of Boris Johnson. On the one hand, you could say to yourself that, there's a lot of bluster. On the other hand, you could say, well, it's effective.
Well, I'm not sure it is effective, because if you look at the record, Boris Johnson, yesterday was his first Prime Minister's question time. He lost the vote. Today, he has also lost the first vote on this deal, this proposal to extend Article 50. He looks set to lose a second vote, and then there's going to be a proposal later today, on the holding of an election in the UK. Early elections, and it looks like he's going to lose that as well. So just exactly what is left for Boris Johnson, what kind of his movement he can make after that as being Prime Minister, looks pretty uncertain.
All right. It was 21 members of Parliament, Sajjad Karim, who Tuesday evening did not vote with the Prime Minister. According to The Sun, you can add one more name to that list, Caroline Spellman, the member of Parliament. Your thoughts to the way Wednesday is unfolding so far?
Well, I think it's actually, we're at a point that virtually anybody who understood process and procedure was predicting for quite some time. Unfortunately, we're in a situation where the Prime Minister is somebody who believes that force of might can act in a way that undoes all obstacles, including when you no longer have a majority, you don't have the numbers, you don't have a negotiating strategy, you don't have any evidence of real negotiations to put before parliamentarians when that is what they're demanding from you, but that somehow sheer force of will is going to be sufficient to bulldoze your policy through. And therefore, we are now in a situation where the collision between the Parliament and the executive is well underway. I anticipate, unless the Prime Minister actually backs off, we may well find ourselves where we're dragging the law courts and indeed the monarchy into this standoff as well at some stage fairly soon.
At some stage fairly soon. Talk us through it. What happens? At this point in time? Can Parliament gain the upper hand, and once that first bill comes back from the House of Lords, assuming it passes through, which it probably will, the rest of the day in Commons, what happens then?
Well, it's once again, it's about process and procedure. The Prime Minister has said that he will tonight be moving, assuming the vote goes against his position on the bill, that he will be moving for the relevant decisions to be put for a vote regarding dissolution of Parliament and a general election. Now, that will not succeed tonight because the bill needs to go through to the House of Lords in order to be finalised, and that's going to take quite some time. I anticipate eventually, as the unelected chamber, the House of Lords will give way to the House of Commons, but certainly it's going to take a matter of days before we get to that point. So if the Prime Minister presents his election vote tonight, and it is voted down, which it will be because he won't get the two-thirds majority that he needs. You are then in a situation where once that bill comes back, the Prime Minister has said that he refuses to resign, and we do not know what his position will be at that stage. Now, unless the Prime Minister once again moves for there to be a general election, then there is no choice but to have a no confidence. But once again, the Prime Minister has said that he will not necessarily resign as a result of that vote of no confidence. And also, along with that, we're running up against the clock because the Parliament is due to be suspended very, very soon. So, we're in a very interesting dynamic at this moment in time.
Catherine Caron, what do you make of it all? And you've heard Sajjad Karim on two occasions there raise the prospect of Boris Johnson refusing to resign if there's complete gridlock.
Well, it was the same with Theresa May. She refused to resign. She was losing her majority. What's interesting with Boris Johnson is the fact that he says that they have to listen to the voice of the people. Well, if he doesn't have the majority, he should resign. So he tells the others what they have to do, but he doesn't...
Yeah, but pro-Brexit supporters will argue that Parliament's not in sync with what the people want.
Yes, but if he, as a Prime Minister, doesn't have the majority, he should resign. So he is not putting into practice the fact that if you lose the majority, you don't follow then you are not. You have to call for elections, for example.
what would it solve if he resigned? Because would the rebel MPs from inside of the Conservative Party, for instance, agree to have Jeremy Corbyn, the left-wing leader of the Labour Party, as their caretaker prime minister?
I don't think so. I don't think they would agree. I think that the question for the moment is that the Parliament would like the no deal not to take place. That's everybody, all the MPs will finally find a majority for that. So the process which I think is going on is the fact that no deal has to be forgotten. Because we don't know whether the people of Britain, British people, voted for a no deal. Probably not. So having a delay, having debates, in order to know what exactly people want as far as negotiations are concerned, might be, talking, listening, should be, to me, a better idea than shouting the way things are going this way for the moment.
And again, we've seen how in that first vote that took place earlier, one more Conservative member of Parliament crossing the aisle. The Conservatives, if they do go to a general election, more and more exclusively the party of Leave. Again, the Tories have always been a big tent up until now, and we've seen over the years how they've changed when it comes to that issue of Europe. Alan Gainsford has more.
Of the European Union.
It was a gamble that didn't pay off for David Cameron. He had hoped a referendum would end his party's obsession with Europe, confident he could win a majority for Remain and end the infighting that had plagued the Conservatives for over 3 decades.
I will do everything I can as Prime Minister to steady the ship over the coming weeks and months. But I do not think it would be right for me to try to be the captain that steers our country to its next destination.
It was a Tory Prime Minister who applied for membership of the EU in 1961, and another who took Britain into the Union in 1973. Some trace the roots of the current Eurosceptic wing of the party to Margaret Thatcher, who criticised what she saw as Brussels' encroaching powers.
We have not successfully rolled back the frontiers of the state in Britain, only to see them reimposed at a European level, with the European superstate exercising a new dominance from Brussels.
In the following decades, Eurosceptic lawmakers were a vocal minority in the party, a thorn in the side of John Major's leadership. He faced down a rebellion over his signing of the Maastricht Treaty. Fast forward to today, and it's the Brexiteers, once on the fringes, who are running the show, pushing the Tories further to the right and changing the fabric of the party. Boris Johnson is determined to take Britain out of the EU on October 31st, with or without a deal. For many moderate Conservative lawmakers, it's a step too far, as Philip Lee's dramatic defection to the Liberal Democrats shows.
Sadly, the Brexit process has helped to transform this once great party into something more akin to a narrow faction, where an individual's conservatism is measured by how recklessly one wishes to leave the European Union.
After Boris Johnson announced he's suspending Parliament to push his Brexit plans through, a group of 21 Conservative MPs, determined to avoid a no-deal scenario at any cost, formed an alliance, voting against their party line. The unlikely rebels include Winston Churchill's grandson, the former Chancellor Philip Hammond, and former International Development Secretary Rory Stewart. For their disobedience, they've now been expelled from the Tories, a move that marks a radical sea change for the world's oldest political party.
Not a good start, Boris.
Stephen Canning, is it the right move to kick out of the party the likes of Nicholas Soames, of Kenneth Clarke, grandees of the Conservative Party?
I think, you sum up the point quite well there. They are grandees of the Conservative Party, and they act like that, and they treat themselves like that. And they perhaps become a bit too obsessed with the history and the tradition of the Conservative Party and their own viewpoint and beliefs. than they do with the will of the people of the United Kingdom. And at the end of the day, Boris Johnson is trying to deliver something that everyone has failed to deliver for 3 years. And he is trying to deliver on a promise made to the people of this country that if they voted a certain way, the government would implement it. And they are standing in the way of that. And I think it is quite right that, having chosen that stance, they are removed from the Conservative Party.
But you heard Catherine Coron earlier saying that
it's not about whether going out or not.
I mean,
the question is not whether going out or not of Europe. The question is how. To me,
yeah, that the British did not vote for a no-deal Brexit, and we saw many of those who back Boris Johnson today vote against their own government under Theresa May.
But what's important is the British voted for a Brexit, and we may be in a position now where, in fact, the most likely outcome and the most possible outcome could be a no-deal Brexit. I don't believe that's Boris Johnson's preference. I think Boris Johnson wants to secure a deal. But if you take no deal off the table, we cannot have a negotiation. No deal is the table. You can't go into a negotiation saying, I won't walk away. That is not how negotiations work. So binding the Prime Minister's hand and removing his ability to threaten no deal in a negotiation with the European Union will mean that Britain gets a worse deal. He must have the option to be able to walk away from the negotiations.
And you kick these dissident members of parliament out of the party, notifying them by SMS?
Well, I think they actually got phone calls. Many of them got phone calls from the party whip, but it was made very clear to them beforehand that the Prime Minister saw this as a vote of confidence in himself and that this was a three-line whip and they were expected to vote with the government. It wasn't a surprise. They knew what they were doing. They knew that were they to pick this course of action, they would no longer be Conservative members of Parliament. So they shouldn't act surprised or shocked at the action he's taken. In fact, I think they should be oppressed that Boris Johnson has shown such strong and stern leadership that has been lacking for so long.
I'm sorry, but first of all, the Prime Minister himself rebelled against Theresa May's deal and voted against it twice when he was in the Conservative Party.
And if she'd been a strong leader, she would have removed the whip.
She did not do that, and this is the first time that members within the party, which is supposed to be a party which accepts people with all views to negotiate together to find a solution, cannot go and kick everybody out of the party who disagrees with the Prime Minister. And what we're seeing here is not the Conservative Party opening up to give the British public what it wants, and the British public was never given the option of a no deal in the referendum of 2016. We're not seeing here the Conservative Party opening up and giving the British people what it wants, and I think there's a majority in the House of Commons against a no deal, like there is a majority in the United Kingdom against a no deal. And what we have got here is the party sliding further to the far right and becoming the Brexit party.
Philip Turrell, I'm going to have to interrupt you because we have to take a very quick break. Stay with us, though. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're wondering what's going to happen next in the UK after Boris Johnson was rebuffed on his very first big vote, and his losing streak set to continue this Wednesday in the House of Commons. With us, former Conservative Party advisor Stephen Canning joins us from London. Welcome back as well from Manchester to a former Conservative member of the European Parliament, Sajjad Karim, here in the studio. Catherine Coron, Associate Professor of British Civilization at the University Panthéon-Assas. You say you're going to be teaching a course this semester
on Brexit.
On Brexit.
On the economic impact of the Brexit, because this is really important.
And we'll see if you have to rewrite the curriculum as it goes.
I'll use the debate.
All right. And France 24's Philip Turrell is with us as well. Boris Johnson, when he came in, making as his party leader in the Commons, a long-time right-wing backbencher who has now moved to the front of the class. And during Tuesday's debate, Jacob Rees-Mogg took visible pleasure, it seems, in goading his opponents by lounging during that debate. Stephen Canning, is that the face of the Conservative Party now?
I think it demonstrates Jacob Rees-Mogg's frustration at what is going on. You know, he has sat there and watched for 3 years MPs debate backwards and forwards what form this should take, what should happen, and making no real progress. And whether you want a hard Brexit, a soft Brexit, or no Brexit at all, this should have been resolved by now. This should have had some sort of resolution. And I think he was helping to demonstrate his frustration and the frustration of many normal people in this country at how long this process is taking.
Sajjad Karim, your reaction?
Well, I'd like to come back to one of the points that was made earlier about needing to have no deal on the table, otherwise no negotiation can take place. So one of the people that had the whip withdrawn from him yesterday, Sir Nicholas Soames, spent a considerable amount of time with the Prime Minister, actually having a discussion about exactly what it is that the Prime Minister was asking for. And it was very telling. Yesterday evening, Sir Nicholas actually declared that what Prime Minister Johnson is asking for is something that can never be delivered by the European Union. Now, in those circumstances, when you are asking for something that cannot be delivered in any fashion at all, then saying that you have to keep no deal on the table, I mean, I'm afraid it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, because what you're asking for cannot be delivered. And when it can't be delivered, your default option is to commit self-harm. And so, you know, the whole thing... Is
it self-harm, though, Sajjad Karim? Has Boris Johnson looked at the political landscape in the UK, seen that it's fragmented, and decided, well, I'd rather have a smaller but united party that's energized, just like Donald Trump has managed to energize his base in the United States, and that's the best way to go into a general election campaign?
Well, I'm sorry, I make the mistake of using the term self-harm from a national interest point of view, whereas quite clearly the Prime Minister is not taking any such view of the situation that he finds himself in. And I think you're quite right. He's made a calculation that actually he would much rather have a Conservative Party that is far to the right of what it has ever traditionally been, with a view to, he believes that will secure a greater majority for him. I'm afraid if we go into a general election, he is going to have a very, very rude awakening indeed to that particular calculation.
We saw Philip Turrell, Boris Johnson, put his feet on the table when he went to see Emmanuel Macron. And we had a bit of a chuckle. Oh, it's Boris being Boris when he did that. Now when you see Jacob Rees-Mogg spread out along on the front benches there, do you get the sense that this is, it's more than just goading. It's a calculation, a political calculation?
I think they're two radically different people, even if they're both in favour of the same thing. I think Boris didn't exactly put his feet on the table. He was still moving his feet and maybe placing his foot on the table for a split second, but obviously there was a freeze frame of that, and people thought it was him putting his feet up on the table, like we can see in those images there. But Boris Johnson's always been known for being a bit of a buffoon, a joker, someone with a sense of humour who likes to get on with people. You know, he's a former journalist, so he'll be there saying, come on, let's get an agreement between the two of us. Come on, let's just talk. We can get there. We can do this. We can do that. A bit like the language we've seen him using in the House of Commons. As for Jacob Rees-Mogg, he is a much more straight person called the Minister for the 18th Century amongst his colleagues in the House of Commons. And actually the pictures of him last night lying there on the front bench I found actually quite shocking, because there was a total lack of respect, not only for those in his own party, but also for the opposition. And maybe he is frustrated, maybe he is bored, but he's being seen by millions of people across the country. And what kind of image is that going to portray of politicians in the UK?
Let me ask you this, Stephen Canning, because we heard on the BBC this Wednesday, Rory Stewart, who ran against Boris Johnson for the post of Conservative leader, claim that there's really only something like 60 to 70 of those members of the House of Commons who are in favour, for instance, of a no backstop solution with Ireland, who are in favour of the more hardline approach to Brexit that Jacob Rees-Mogg is in favour of. is it not going to rest uneasy with many of those who sided with Johnson to have him doing that?
Well, I think the important thing as well is, and we keep talking about no deal. I am of the belief that no deal is not the preference of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister wants to get a deal. He wants to get a wide-ranging deal, as do the majority of Conservative parliamentarians. As you say, there is a minority that are more hardline, that want something harder, but the majority are after a deal and are after a solution. I think.
Yeah, but do they have the keys to the candy store, that hard line?
I think the important thing here is there are a lot of people on both sides. So there are hardline Brexiteers now who have resigned themselves to the fact that they need to soften their position if they want to get out. And they're not going to soften it much, but they need to soften their position if we are ever going to leave. They can see the prize that they fought their entire political life for slowly disappearing. And I think they will rally around Boris Johnson as their last chance to actually deliver on Brexit.
Sajjad Karim, your thoughts personally going forward as somebody who's represented the Conservative Party in Brussels at the European Parliament?
I'm extremely concerned as to where we are as a party and indeed where our politics is and where we as a country could well find ourselves in a very short space of time. This idea that somehow a form of agreement can be arrived at before the 31st of October, I'm afraid is an absolute non-starter. Even if we are to arrive at some form of solution to the backstop, that needs the presentation of solutions to Brussels by the United Kingdom. We haven't presented those solutions. In fact, based upon many of the conversations that the Prime Minister has had over the last couple of days with colleagues of mine, it's become quite clear we do not have any solutions to present. And therefore, this agreement is not going to be in place on this side of the 31st of October, and we therefore will have to have a delay whilst we then see where we go from there. I'm not quite sure where things will go from there because it is, quite frankly, it is such a huge mess. And the point that was just made by Mr. Canning about people softening their position, as of yesterday, there are still 20 members of the ERG group who are openly saying that no matter what Prime Minister Boris Johnson comes back to them with, they will vote against any form of agreement. They will only vote in favour of a no-deal Brexit if a vote is required. Otherwise, they're quite happy just to allow us to drop out using procedure if they have to. So, we're in the biggest political mess anybody could have thought up, and it's conjuring up constitutional issues for us. I just hope that we find a way to delay things beyond the 31st of October, and I hope that we can get back into some form of consensus-based politics immediately thereafter.
All right, because we're running short on time, we should also talk a bit about the strategy of the opposition. After Tuesday evening's vote, Jeremy Corbyn alluded to Boris Johnson's decision last week to extend Parliament's suspension in the build-up to that October 31st Brexit deadline, thereby shortening the amount of time in which to act even further.
We live in a parliamentary democracy. We do not have a presidency, but a Prime Minister. Prime Ministers govern with the consent of the House of Commons, representing the people in whom the sovereignty rests. There is no consent. There is no consent in this House to leave the European Union without a deal. There is no majority for no deal in the country. As I've said before, if the Prime Minister has the confidence in his Brexit policy, when he has one he can put forward, he should put it before the people in a public vote. And so he wants to table a motion for a general election. Fine, get the bill through first in order to take no deal off the table.
Go on, explain that one to your students. Jeremy Corbyn, who's been clamoring for an election for so long, saying, yes, we want a general election, but only when this this bill that the opposition has safely made it back home.
Yes, because what is really important for the moment is to be sure no deal will take place, if, taking into account the fact that Boris Johnson is not playing by the rules. Theresa May was not either doing so because she negotiated alone for 3 years. And when, if you don't ask people, British people, what they think by using the means of the parliament, you cannot get any majority. So Boris Johnson was against her. He voted against her. I think he's much better playing against than playing for. And we can see that he cannot get any majority.
But could anyone get Can anyone get a majority?
I'm certain, and everybody.
Because I've looked at the initial polls.
What is sure is that Parliament voted for no deal. I mean, they don't want a no deal agreement.
They're against no deal.
They are against no deal.
But what are they for? And more specifically,
yes,
can they coalesce around a single
leader? If you want to get consensus, you have to start with the thing for what people agree. And here, what deputies, MPs agree is about the fact that they don't want a no deal.
That's still something they're against. But what are they for? And who are they for? That's the question.
The Labour Party has said, whether or not this is going to happen or not, I don't know. But the Labour Party has said what they want is to win the election. They are confident that they can. The date of this election is being bandied about.
It's not what the polls suggest.
Well, they think they can. The polls don't think they can, but they say they will because they'll form some kind of coalition government afterwards to take power from the Conservatives. And certainly with all the Conservatives being booted out of the party or leaving of their own agreement, it's weakening Boris Johnson's position. So Labour's saying simply, OK, we get to be in power, then we will work out a Brexit deal, then we will go with that deal back to the public and we will say, is that the Brexit deal that you want, or would you like to remain in the European Union? And that is the strategy that they are putting forward for the moment. What we don't know is exactly when this election, this snap election that Boris Johnson is going to propose, probably later today, will take place. The whole problem here is that they want, as Jeremy Corbyn was saying, this legislation to be voted into law, to be signed as a decree by the Queen and voted into law, so that Boris Johnson, whatever happens, cannot try to get around that, pull a few strings, and then take Britain out of the EU on the 31st of October without respecting what the Parliament and what the House of Lords have said should be the law. And that is why they're saying, OK, vote this into law first, and then we'll agree to an election. So it's highly unlikely that Boris Johnson will get the two-thirds majority of all the MPs in the House of Commons tonight to go ahead with his election until that new motion being discussed at the moment is voted into law, probably at the earliest by next week.
If you look at the breakdown of Tuesday's initial motion, you'll see it's not only about those initial 21 Conservative MPs who crossed the aisle. The point is, when you look at these numbers, the next Parliament in its makeup is less likely to be mostly blue and solidly blue on one side and solidly red on the other. There's going to be more of other colors in between. So how deep is the leadership crisis at this point, Stephen Canning?
I think there is a leadership crisis, but I think the leadership crisis is the Labour Party. You know, as you've said, they've been calling for an election for a long time, and now they don't want one. And the reason they don't want one is because Jeremy Corbyn is dead scared of laying out what his Brexit plan is. He knows that if he comes out and makes it look like he's got a soft stance, or perhaps might be pushing for a second referendum, or even perhaps, looking at revoking it at all, he will lose the Labour heartlands in the north. And actually, as a lifelong Eurosceptic himself, probably was quite happy to go for quite a hard Brexit. So the leadership crisis is on the Labour Party side. Actually, there's not a leadership crisis in the Tory side. Our leader is strong. Our leader has taken clear and decisive action. Many people may disagree with the action he's taken, but he's taken quite clear action, and he actually now has quite a united party. The leadership crisis is on the red side.
It's a shrinking party, though. It's hard to argue that he's strong.
I think he's quite strong. He's stuck clearly to his strategy. He's laid out clearly what he wants to do. He's continuing to push for what he wants to do. He hasn't U-turned. He has made clear on what he will do if people vote against him, and he has carried that out. At no point has he demonstrated any weakness. He has carried on and been clear and decisive, and I see no reason why that will change. And I think that ultimately, if an election does come, that will be rewarded by the people of the country when they look at what Labour has on offer, which is no clear strategy, no clear plan, and actually perhaps a tendency to want to perhaps keep us in the European Union, and Boris Johnson, who has been firm and clear that he will leave.
Sajjad Karim, divisions among Labour supporters, divisions among Conservative supporters. Where can the providential figure emerge from?
Well, it's quite interesting that one of the results of this whole Brexit experience for the United Kingdom is actually going to be a much more continental form of politics. I'm fairly clear in my mind, and looking at all of the polling, that we are going to see much more coalition politics in the future, and at the very least a greater role being played by what are today smaller parties, but they are going to grow. So the very nature of our politics is going to change per se. And I think that consensual approach that for many, many decades we were able to more or less sustain within the first-past-the-post system that we had. I'm afraid I don't see us getting beyond that now. So we will have some form of electoral reform that takes place as well in the coming years. And that naturally is going to move us more in the direction of consensual politics, coalition building. And that in itself will actually play the presidential role that we need.
What kind of electoral reform? The end of first past the post for in each constituency?
I think today we are in a situation where we're going to have to undertake very radical reforms, both in terms of reviewing whether we can maintain the issue of not having a written constitution, and also whether our democratic system is actually fit for purpose today.
When you look, Catherine Coron, at how the last presidential and legislative elections in this country blew up the system, is it possible under the way it works in the UK? Especially with the nation.
No, it works totally differently, and I think crises are different too. We are back to the point we were before in France either. I mean, there are even more. Problem is that there are more and more differences between even each parties. Whether this here, I agree with you. The old parties are not do not fit anymore the political landscape, and I think that within parties there should be more debate, which is not the case.
There's less debate right now.
Yes, whether it is in France or in Great Britain. They are not listening to people who think differently within their parties.
We are in a situation now where this is all due to a weakness of leadership in the United Kingdom, which doesn't date from Boris Johnson or Theresa May, but before that. This has all been caused by a infighting within the Conservative Party between the Eurosceptical part of the party and the rest of it, and the frustration of leaders in that party to try to sort that out. And unfortunately, they took the wrong decision in holding a referendum over something far too complicated for most people to understand and to vote for either yes or no. And that is why the United Kingdom is in the current situation that it's in.
All right, we're going to leave it there. I want to thank Stephen Canning for joining us from London. I want to thank Sajjad Karim in Manchester, Catherine Coron, Philip Turl. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Emma James.
Hi there.
Plenty of theatrics this Wednesday. plenty of theatrics Tuesday night as well.
Absolutely. And there is one image that if you've been on social media at all, you cannot have escaped. Interestingly, only one newspaper chose to put it on their front page. Everyone else went with images of Boris Johnson. But the National, which is a Scottish newspaper, decided to go with Jacob Rees-Mogg, who is, of course, a Conservative MP and also Leader of the House, which might not be clear from his position there, looking well, more than a little relaxed. Some would say contemptuous, if you look at the National's coverage of it. Tory contempt for us laid bare is their headline or subheading with Jacob Rees-Mogg.
It wasn't just for a minute or two. This was, this was clearly to go to the...
Absolutely. And he was criticised by MPs in the House. He's been criticised by MPs online too. Anna Turley saying the physical embodiment of arrogance, entitlement, disrespect and contempt for our Parliament. Angela Rayner as well, who's a Labour MP, saying, I'm half expecting his nanny to march into the chamber with a blanket pillow and a hot cup of Horlicks for the poor man. Some people are having a bit of humour about this whole situation, rightly or wrongly, given how serious this all is. This person pointing out that his position, in their view, mirrors the government majority in the way in which it has dropped off. This is him in The Simpsons. Of course, normally they head for the sofa. There he has beaten them to it. And this, a nod to Titanic, paint me like one of your French girls. And this one too has him in a more traditional artistic position, alas, poor Ophelia. And the final one of these funny ones, just after Nanny bought the warm milk, nighty-night, sweet dreams, all the millions you've made shorting the pound. It's one of the biggest criticisms of Jacob Rees-Mogg is that, yes, he's pro-Brexit, but he's doing all he can to avoid the negative impact on his own businesses and his own hedge fund. And he's actually making an awful lot of money out of the Brexit uncertainty.
On a more serious tone, we saw, by the way, we saw this first vote that took place earlier where the extension of the opposition's majority in this case.
Yes, now that's the serious moment. But once again, Boris Johnson, very much wedded to his bumbling buffoon act, decided to once again really drag down the tone today. Despite his big loss last night, there's no humility from him whatsoever. He was facing a grilling from the leader of the opposition, Jeremy Corbyn. At one point was seen to be mouthing that he was a big girl's blouse, which people thought was inappropriate to say the least. And then another insult, which has upset some people, amused others. Take a listen to what he had to say.
I know he's worried about free trade deals with America, but there's only one chlorinated chicken that I can see in this house, and he's on that bench. Will he confirm again? Will he confirm?
So there you go. He's branded Jeremy Corbyn a chlorinated chicken. That, of course, refers to the fact that the US wants to sell the UK chlorinated chicken. It's not something ordinarily that British shoppers would be heading out for in their droves. The Leave EU campaign has unsurprisingly seized on it, creating this image along with the quotation and Jeremy Corbyn's head on the top of a chicken. This joke account too saying, Boris Johnson just called me a chlorinated chicken. I am not. I am an organic chicken. But some people really wondering quite what is going on here. Is this really funny? You can't deny the wonder of Johnson's wit, says this person sarcastically. You're a chlorinated chicken, he told Corbyn. That's why the fees are £5 million a term at Eton. They're not quite that much. But yes, he's a very educated man. Perhaps he could have come up with something better. And this gentleman makes a very good point. Why on earth would you want to plant chlorinated chicken in the minds of the public when it's a consequence of your own Brexit policy? Now, some people are saying, what's wrong with chlorinated chicken? We have chlorine in the water. But I think the vast majority of people don't want to have their chicken washed in chlorine. But this person saying another masterly tactical move from Johnson. One person who has certainly been wrestling back the sort of dignity, if you like, of the Houses of Parliament is this gentleman, Nicholas Soames, the grandson, of course, of Winston Churchill. And he stood up today to give what will be his final speech. He has been deselected because he voted against the government. And he spoke up today to say that basically he was never trying to overturn Brexit. He'd always backed the withdrawal bill, unlike certain other people, namely Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Emma James, many thanks, and we will continue to follow throughout. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.